Okay, so we're back and we're going to be talking about additives. The world is confused about this, so I brought on someone that can set us straight. Dr. Dustin Moore is a public health expert, and he's really passionate about evidence-based practice and ready, clear scientific communication. I mean, seriously, do we need this nowadays or not? He has a PhD in public health from UC Irvine, and really just did nutrition education. He does publication. But really, what I love about him is that he can, dwindle this down to information that we can use. Because goodness gracious, we are so confused about food additives. So, Dustin, thank you so much for coming on Spot On.
Good to be on here with you, Joan.
Oh, great. All right. So, listen. I mean, I've been in this field 100 years, so I know that food additives, what they do. But can you explain to our listeners here what are food additives?
Simple explanation of a food additive is it's items, ingredients that we put into our food in order to either enhance or maintain certain properties to the food. So, preservation, things that modify the texture, make it more palatable, fortification, colorants, processing aids for when you're actually preparing the food that make it easier to retain properties. That's like the most common functions and features of what we put it in there. But just think of them as ingredients that are added for the purpose, like I said, enhancing and maintaining properties to food.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't understand that food additives are used, as you said, enhancing properties to increase shelf life. So,
Absolutely.
and now, nowadays, with the food costs are just, I mean, that's a whole nother episode. But the food costs are crazy. But if you want that bread to last and not get moldy, right? There
Hmm.
are food additives added to that. And also, like you said, fortification. And when we think about how many grains and cereals have been fortified with folic acid, which is a
Hmm.
B vitamin, and you and I both know that is so, so important for women should they get pregnant. So, there's a lot of good on that. So what is the problem? Why are we hearing that there are some food additives that are bad? What's the downside here?
So I guess there's this broad phenomenon called chemophobia, which is out there, which is the idea that the addition of chemicals, the addition of materials into food that are not naturally there, and I'm using air quotes as I'm saying that, the addition of these items has some sort of construed harm or is possibly dangerous or is just not originally there, so why bother? So people I guess for on one instance, it's easy for people to be concerned about it because like why is this added into it? What's the purpose of it? It's easy to be misled, thinking like, oh, this is nuts. Like, look at what they found in this one study that was performed in rats and mice. And I think another instance is people can just be intentionally, willfully misleading. That tends to come more so from like the influencer space about, did you know that your food has this or it contains this? And then I think there's a tendency for people just to the thing that I look at oftentimes is people who romanticize the past as though our food supply in the past was somehow superior because it excluded all of these additives or didn't have them present in them, and that people were healthier as a result. And I just, again, the notion is like, well, what are you romanticizing? Because no, like we live longer today, we're healthier today, we have a more robust food supply today than we ever have in the past. And that is thanks in large part to number one, obviously, farmers who have improved their agricultural tech and their outputs, but also the addition of the additives. So I don't know. There's a lot of angles you could tackle that on as to like what is the deal? Why are people concerned about it for all for food additives in general? But those would be my top suggestions as to why that is the case.
That's so interesting when you say that when it was you glamorize what was done years ago. When I look at old movies and I see the woman with the chicken over the open fire and baking the bread, I'm like, I am so happy I was not born then, because that's what I mean. Because your whole day is like making a chicken. So I totally agree. Totally agree with that. All right. I always say that the Americans have the safest food in the world. But can you
Mhm.
support that for me, please, Dustin?
No, so we have, I mean, on a level about how you objectively measure food safety, there's a, which I wonder if I actually still have it up because I was reviewing this and looking over this data last night. But there's basically a functional objective score that you look at for determining, food accessibility by nation, food safety by nation, these other factors that kind of go into the food supply. The United States consistently is number three for out of all nations, having and scoring as the safest food supply for in terms of like regulation, illnesses that are derived from food, food safety in terms of like adulteration of food, like things that are not supposed to be in food but are found to be in the food. So we are just top of the list, top of the nations in terms of our overall food safety supply. So yes, absolutely.
I thought I love being number one. Who's one and two? I mean, who beat us out there?
Number one is Finland.
Oh, yeah.
Number two is it's somewhere. It's a European country. I don't remember which one it is off the top of my head, though.
I'm going to Finland because Finland gets number one for everything. You know what I mean? The happiest
They're very
people.
popular.
I'm going to Finland. Okay, it's good to know that. All right. So, what kind of checks and balances are in place in the United States right here to make sure that anything that's added to say extend shelf life or is okay and they're safe?
So, within the United States, on the state side, the Food and Drug Administration is what's in charge of regulating additives. And the way that this is done is typically like they use a process that's called risk assessments, risk analysis. And risk analysis is where you're going to be taking anything identified as a potential hazard and looking at how much exposure people get to it. Because on the one hand, if you were just to go exclusively by hazard, the problem with that is that many things could be considered a hazard if exposed in high enough a dose. Like, for example, water. Like, you drink too much water in one setting, even though it's life-giving and very important, it all of a sudden can become dangerous if you get too much of a dose. Sunlight is important. You can make vitamin D from it. Feels good to be out in the sun. Too much exposure causes sunburn. So the procedure is identify first and foremost, is there anything hazardous about this additive? Is there anything that's been tested or identified, whether that's in just in vitro cell culture studies, in animal models, in human beings? And then they take any identified hazard and they look at exposure levels and seeing if there's any kind of cutoff or change in what that ultimately tells you about the risk. So again, a lot of compounds which you can consume which cause harm in mega doses you would
Hmm.
never see and never be able to consume when it's used and applied into that food product. And a simple example of that could be something like, for example, aspartame, which is used as a non-nutritive sweetener, a no zero calorie sweetener for diet sodas and beverages. We've seen some studies showing that in very large doses you can cause or get weird effects within rats, but the doses that you'd have to get in order for that to occur, you'd have to drink the equivalent of like 5,000 cans of Diet Coke in a day. So it's impossible to hit the threshold. And that's how the FDA puts the check into place is we want to see not only, okay, is there a hazard or a danger to this additive, but how much of it would you consume? And then they can control that way, how much you're allowed to use in food.
Right. Dustin, that's really interesting what you just said because salt. I mean, you're not going to get a
Hmm.
preservative older than salt, right? You put
No.
salt in food, right? And that will help preserve the food. And let me tell you, because I have a salt tooth, I don't have a sweet tooth. I have a salt tooth. I love the taste
Salt
of it.
tooth, really?
Yeah, so I call it a salt tooth. Um,
Okay.
so I loved it. But if you have outrageous amounts of salt, on a continual basis, or have a susceptibility, like I have high blood pressure, then it becomes a problem. So here we
Hmm.
go. A little bit is good, but again, you don't want to do a lot of it chronically, because then it can cause a problem. So we have a list. So the FDA has a list, right, of
Hmm.
approved additives. It's grass or
Yes.
something. So explain this.
GRAS.
Hmm.
GRAS is an acronym that stands for generally recognized as safe, and it
Hmm.
refers to substances that have a long history of use within food products, and there is a scientific consensus showing that they are safe for use, that when not applied in mega doses or extreme doses or anything like that, there's no concern or issue related to their use. And salt is one of those added on to that list. There's a very lengthy list you can check out and you can look at, but it's basically just something, a list that the FDA says these are cleared and approved for use, within appropriate levels already.
Right, right. You know, a lot of people, you talked about glamorizing this. A lot of people think that the Europeans' way of analyzing and approving additives is better than the way that the United States does. Can you explain what the difference is? Because a lot of times in the media, they'll say, oh, this
Mhm.
additives is banned in Europe, but why are
Yeah.
we allowing it in the U.S. food supply?
Yeah. Yeah. So within Europe, they have what's called the European Food Safety Authority. That's kind of their counter equivalent
Hmm.
to our FDA in the United
Hmm.
States.
Hmm.
The EFSA operates off of what's called the precautionary principle. Their driving factor is the precautionary principle, which differs from our, because I mentioned previously that our method, our model of assessing safety is by risk analysis. But the EFSA instead follows functionally the hazard principle. They look for anything, any hazard whatsoever, and if there is anything identifiable within either animal models or human models of study, they are more likely to just say no. It doesn't matter how dilute the risk is, it doesn't matter how far off the effect is. If they identify something and they deem it to be a hazard, at functionally any level whatsoever, they're more likely to just say no and remove it completely. So for them, the question is not how much risk do you reduce or how do you control the risk. For them, the question is how much harm do you avoid. And so because of that, they're more quick to kick things out of their food supply based upon that principle. So for the way that they operate, all of them follow this standardized E number. They go and they review their food additives, they look over it, they do ongoing systematic reviews. So even something that's been approved for use and has been assigned, like I said, that designated E number, they'll go back to it, they'll review it again. If anything new comes out, then they might pull approval and say you're not allowed to use it instead. They're very strict in that respect, but a key detail of something that people should know and your listeners should be aware of is the fact that it's not a superior method of
Mm.
analysis. It's a different method of analysis, and you can still come to very different conclusions about what's permissible. We know that because there are plenty of additives which are banned in the United States that are permitted in Europe, even
Oh,
with their stricter
interesting.
regulation about removal of anything that they deem to be hazardous whatsoever. So it's not a reasonable analysis to look at their system and say, well, they're stricter, therefore they're safer. No, they have a tighter method on it, but that doesn't necessarily make that their food supply to be safer
Right, right. So in other words, you're saying we could be banning something here based on our science, but it's okay in Europe.
or based on our level of exposure that we
Exposure,
get to
right,
it. Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Right, right. And it's so interesting because a lot of people, think that the European is stricter and better, but not necessarily because they don't take in this whole how much are you going to be consuming of this over a lifetime or
Right.
whatever to make it is it worth it? And then the flip side is if you take it out, what does that do for the safety of the food? Does the safety of the food go down? It's going to spoil or cause other problems. So interesting. This is so interesting.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this is we're back to what gets into the media from influencers or people that don't understand this regulation and scare the living daylights out of you.
Yeah.
Another problem is the names. The names are frightening. You know what I mean? How many times have we heard ascorbic acid? And you're like, what? I'm not having that. And of course, we know that's vitamin C. So the
Hmm.
names are frightening in itself. And that's what I want to get to because there's about four or five of them that have been out there and people have said, oh my gosh, this is a problem. This is going to, cause problems. And probably the one that has gotten recent press is red dye number 3. So could you
Hmm.
explain what is the problem with red dye number 3?
So, okay, red dye number three, I think it was in 2023, in California, my home state. The governor came out and he signed a bill. It was Assembly Bill 418, which functionally banned a couple of specific food additives, among which was red dye number three. So, red dye number three, the banning in the issue fell under basically the principle of something called the Delaney Clause, which is a legal precedent that was set to say that anytime you've identified, I think it was either a dye, I don't know if it was specific to dyes, but if you identify a compound which
Right.
has such amount of um, association with cancer risk, then
Mm-hmm.
you are not allowed to provide it with FDA approval. So in the 1980s, I think it was, there was a couple of additional studies that came out. And again, for the data that they put together, they showed a small association between red dye and cancer outcomes. I think it was looking specifically at rats, which is kind of
Right.
usually the case. So in any instance, the FDA looked at this and they said, look, there is a clear dose dependent effect here. And even when there is a very high dose, the associated risk is very, very minimal. And so, because of that, they said, okay, well, here's what we'll do. You can't have red dye be in cosmetics, red dye number three, no more in cosmetics, but within the food supply, it is okay still. So, California came along and looked at this and identified this, and they decided to set their own precedent by, on a state level, banning red dye number three within the entire state. And that's kind of a big upset and a huge turnaround because, as far as I know, it's the first time that you've had a state independently ban use of an additive that was allowed or permitted on a federal level. And that's going to make for some very shaky things as to, what that ultimately plays out with, because I mean, California, we're a huge market for everything. We are the most populous state. We got 40 million people, 40 plus million people in this state. So what does that mean for people who use their products or who make their products and have any business in California whatsoever? It means they're probably going to have to just remove it anyways, even though it's, still permitted within 49 other states in the union.
Right. That's interesting, Dustin, because you are a huge state. And so, if I'm making a product, I'm a manufacturer, and you can't make two of the same products, one without and one with. I mean,
Right.
that'd be crazy.
No.
And then, and then you're going to have to find an alternative to red dye number three or whatever it is, and that's going to cost money. And who's
Mhm.
going to pick up that expense?
I mean, that'll be us.
That's
Consumers are going to be
right.
the who pick up the expense. And
Right.
that's kind
Right.
of another question, interesting question too, about like what happens if you remove like synthetic dyes in general. I mean, the one thing that you get out of synthetic dyes, which is underappreciated, is you get consistent looking food. If you can
Hmm.
control the coloration, you can control that consistently, and that reduces some complexities that, were are not what I would call groundbreaking or really going to shake up your life that much. But still, it's a point of appreciation that whenever you get this food, it looks like this. And oftentimes we use visuals as a cue to tell us whether or not something is wrong with our food. If you also remove those, or if you have to use something else, it is going to increase the legal process. It is going to make it more challenging, and it will likely increase food costs. So there is a definitive trade-off, a couple of trade-offs that you'd see if you were to, just say, okay, no more synthetic dyes, only natural dyes or something like that. You're going to sacrifice control and you're going to sacrifice price off the top
Right.
for what you do with that.
Right. And especially if there's, really no good evidence that the amount that you consume would be problematic. You know,
Hmm.
what you just said, another interesting thing. God, you're so interesting, Justin. Is
Thanks, Joan.
the consistency of visual. I mean, you eat with your eyes. You eat
Yeah,
with your eyes, right? But if you see something and it looks off in color, you throw it away.
right.
And see now, you're talking about wasting food. We're talking about emptying it into the landfills, greenhouse gases, and more importantly, that money that you spent is just you just threw it in the landfill. So
Hmm.
very, very interesting how you can keep. It's very intricate, about how you'd have to keep everything on the plate looking well and costs and everything. So very, very interesting of what's going on there. The other one is sodium benzoate. Is that I probably
Hmm.
missed that. Okay, so what the heck is that? See, benzoate. Yeah, try to use that in Scrabble. You probably could get extra points. Go ahead.
It's a preservative,
Yeah.
and we use it more commonly in applications for acidic products or things that are prone to microbial growth. I mean, the most common
Mhm.
application is drinks, soft drinks, dressings, jams. Sodium benzoate is a preservative, which helps prevent any type of yucky stuff growing in there that you don't want to be there.
Mhm.
One of the reasons why it gets targeted and why it gets criticized is because people say, well, it can be converted into benzene. Benzene is a carcinogen. The
Mhm.
catch, however, is that this reaction only occurs if you combine sodium benzoate with vitamin C under heat and light or oxidation. And that is what happens. And so, as I understand it, food manufacturers, they oftentimes limit the additives, these two going together. They don't ever use them together. So if you have like a
Mhm.
product which has sodium benzoate and they need another type of, functional additive, they're not going to use vitamin C. It's FDA approved. It's approved by the EFSA over in the European Union as well. So, the criticism towards it is largely unwarranted, in my opinion.
Right, right, right. So here we go. Misinformation. What about this one is really confusing. Nitrates and nitrites, please help us.
Nitrates and nitrites are preservatives. We put them in processed meats, bacon, ham, sausage, deli meats. They prevent growth of bacteria and really
Mhm.
nasty ones that you would absolutely not want to be dealing with, like, Clostridium botulinum, which is responsible for botulism poisoning. But they also help give the meat an appropriate color and they help enhance the flavor of it as well. They have a criticism related to their ability to be converted into nitrosamines, which are linked to cancers. But again, that has an issue to do with them oxidizing or with them being in super high doses, because we find that a lot of foods naturally possess nitrates on their own, like a lot of
Mhm.
vegetables, for example. However, it's a simple way where you just include other food additives which prevent the development of these nitrosamines, making them again generally safe. I think that nitrates and nitrites, both of them I believe are GRAS at this point. We've used them for so long in such a safe fashion.
Doesn't your body make this normally and help you, the nitrates? I mean, doesn't it? Isn't your body make, as reactions to functioning make these?
I think so, but honestly, I'm not sure about that. I
Okay.
know I know they're naturally occurring. I know you get
Right.
them in vegetables. There's plenty of
Right.
vegetables that provide them. I wouldn't be surprised if your body did as well.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, I believe that you have a beneficial effect in your body. So this, I think that's
Cool.
why this is so confusing. Okay, so we have here we go again. Propylparaben. What the heck?
Propylparabens.
Yeah, oh, please.
That was on the list. That was one of the items that was banned in 2023 along with red dye number 3. It's a preservative, but it's
Mm-hmm.
a preservative that has a special function of disrupting membranes, the cellular membranes of bacterias and molds and yeasts, and so it helps keep them out of our food supply. We use them in liquid medicines, which is obviously an important detail, cakes, tortillas, syrups. Um, but in the European Food Safety Authority, in the EFSA, they identified very large doses were associated with endocrine disruption within mice models. And so they looked at propylparabens and they said, nope, we're going to take those out and remove them. Whereas, again, over here in the United States, we said, okay, well, we recognize that there's a hazard associated with them, but it only becomes dangerous when you include them at mega high doses, which you would never see and you would never include in the
Mm-hmm.
foods and the products that they are used in. So another another empty, meaningless ban on something which does nothing functionally to improve the health of American citizens.
Right, right, right. And I'm thinking about caffeine. It's sort of like the salt uh, analogy I use. Caffeine, good, a little bit of good, pick you up. In fact, you need it. They put caffeine in headache medicine because it can help reduce the symptoms of a headache. But having too much,
Hmm.
make you jittery, and then putting it in a powder. I mean, what I remember that that was years ago where you could take caffeine in a powder form, to which people took and actually died because it was like drinking 25 cups of coffee in one
There
little
is
cup.
There is a toxicity load for
Right.
caffeine, and that's one of the deals related to using those as like additives that you control on your own. When it's in a product, you know that it's tightly manufactured and you know it's produced according to very specified standards. Whether that's like, good manufacturing principles, which is a big deal within FDA regulation, or whether or not it's just within company standards about how if you consistently want to get a good product, this is how you have to produce it. But if you take that additive separately and you just give it to consumers, then obviously the risk of people abusing it or overusing it goes up significantly. And anhydrous caffeine was definitely one of those where you could take the powder form of it and people could be very flippant about use of it and just dump loads of it into it and get these doses of caffeine, which can be dangerous. They can be lethal. I don't remember off the top of my head what the exact upper limit was. I want to say it was somewhere around 14,000 milligrams or something like
Wow.
that,
Wow.
which is way more
Oh,
than you would get in a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee is 100 milligrams of caffeine.
right. Right.
A can of Coke, a can of Diet Coke or something like 40 to 50. So it is
Right.
a super high dose that you get, but again, only comes if you have that additive which you can just control and put in on your own, where the risk goes up.
Right. I think the FDA says about 400 milligrams a day is safe for most people. But again, if you're sensitive to it, go down. But
Yeah.
that's very interesting what you just said, Dustin, because here, uh, these additives are regulated. There's some kind of scientific body, the FDA, regulating, saying, okay, you can use this, but not too much, or don't mix it with this. Okay,
Hmm.
so there's people that looked at the science and are regulating. Yet you can get caffeine, and it's the Wild West, and it's out being sold in powder form, which you shouldn't ever do, and nobody's
Hmm.
regulating that.
Well, I mean, no, there's no regulation in terms of like it being sold to consumers, but you just have to again take the context of that, Joan, and think about, well, the issue there is not the powder itself. The issue is the quantity and the dose of it.
Right.
And I mean, that's not terribly different from something like vitamins or minerals, for
Mhm.
example. Like, I mean, within my cabinet, like on one of the dailies that I do, vitamin D is on my list because, pasty guy who's inside a lot of times. And there is an upper limit to that. There is a dangerous amount of that which I can consume, which if I consume way too much of this vitamin D, it causes an overabsorption of calcium, which can cause calcification of tissue. It can cause dangerous hypercalcemia in my blood. That's an effective poor use of the product. So what you're talking there, I think, goes into the issue about consumer protection,
Mhm.
where, what's the likelihood of harm being applied for a person using this, but more specifically, abusing it, misusing it. No different from a ton of the other products that we see in consumer culture and that we use. Cars are dangerous, knives are dangerous, firearms are dangerous. I mean, that's a good question about like what makes for safe and appropriate use of like, how much risk a consumer is willing to take for a product that they buy. But
Right.
yeah.
Right. All right. So, Dustin, what do we do? I mean, because every day, or I'm being dramatic here, but we're often seeing, this one is don't use this. Oh my God, this causes blank, blank, blank. So, where can consumers go? How can they figure out what they're hearing in the media is correct or not? And how can they say, wait a minute, let me just figure this out if this is really true?
Okay, a couple of really good evidence-based sources they can go to. They should listen to you, Joan. They should go to your podcast and
Well,
listen to
that
you.
I was hoping that I would be number one. But go ahead. Thank you.
Point to pitch about that,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Other organizations, like for example, IFIC is one of my big favorite
Mhm.
ones. IFIC is really big. IFIC, they do a lot of consumer information and data and research and whatnot. The IFT, the International Food Technologists Association, they look specifically at all these additives and they can describe and tell you like what's their purpose and what they go in there for. Fantastic organization to go into and check out. And then aside from that, like looking at peer-reviewed literature, I know is not really the top of the charts for what a lot of people are into or what they want to do, but peer-reviewed literature, if you ever want to take a look at it or talk about it or talk to professionals and see what they do, talk to them. I do a newsletter where I share like evidence-based information about a variety of topics within the field of public health. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they've got a good database and good bank about information, not only related to food additives, but also just dietary patterns and nutrition information as well. There's a lot of good sources out there. There's a lot of good sources and a lot of credible people out there whose just sole interest is trying to share information and science and be persuasive rather than coercive or try to fear nudge you into making certain choices about something.
You know what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to put up on the Spot on Facebook page a list of those that you just said, as
Oh.
well as how can they find you? Just how they get on your newsletter or how do they find you?
I'm fairly active on LinkedIn and Instagram,
Okay.
and my newsletter is called Public Health Dad. It's on Substack. If you type in Public Health Dad Substack, you can get to it from there.
Right. And yeah, it's also your for Instagram too, right? Public Health Dad.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes, it is. Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. So let me put the list of this on the Facebook, Spot on Facebook page. So this way you have a reference to go to. The IFT is wonderful. IFIC, you and I are both in love with IFIC.
Hmm.
So thank you so much, Dustin, because I tell you, people are overwhelmed with, information, misinformation, some of it disinformation. And I
Hmm.
think people just need to let's eat healthy foods in moderation. Let's go out and, walk and do things and worry about other things in your life that are really important, like the weather. You know what I mean? That's important. I get up, I don't know what I'm wearing. It's hot, it's cold, I'm in New England, it's crazy. Anyway, Dustin Moore, Dr. Dustin Moore, I want to thank you so much for being on Spot On.
Thanks a million, Joan. It was a blast with you.
Okay, sir. That was
Is that it?
great. Yes,
Recording
it is.
done?
You,
All
you,
right.
you are done, baby. You are done. Okay, so just
Back over to
stop that.
regular.
Yeah, good.